This video is the instructions for lesson 1.1 in Unit 1. So click back into Unit 1, scroll down to lesson 1.1, and I just want to point out again that it's just these first, no, I take it back. That's not just the first three, but let's take a quick look at the ones that are optional. So the big history on a football field is optional, and the scale of human history on a string. Both of those items are optional. So in this lesson, 1.1 on scale, you do not need to complete those two items. The others, we'll talk specifically about how to do that. So we click into Start Lesson. Again, lesson 1.1 on scale, read the instructions or the introduction. It's always helpful. Read the lesson outcomes. Okay, so the very first item here is the video to scale the solar system. So as always, you should read the purpose, you should read the process, you should read through the key ideas. You should answer the questions in the key ideas section. You should read through the conceptual thinking section and answer this last question. All of that goes in your notebook. So again, you should have in your notebook the heading, Lesson 1.1, Scale. And then you should put the activity to scale the solar system. And then you should have notes about the purpose and about you should have answers to the questions on the key ideas and the conceptual thinking and the summary. Okay. And then you should watch the video. Well, really, you will have watched the video if you've answered those questions under key ideas. But my point is you want to read through those sections first, then watch the video, and then you'll be able to answer the questions under the key ideas, and you'll be able to answer the questions under conceptual thinking, okay? But all of those sections need to have been mentioned in your notebook with notes below them. Okay, the next thing is the vocabulary. Now, in this section, here's the main thing. I didn't list it as optional, but it's not really critical to me that you go through these activities as expected, but I do think, or as described here, but I do think it's helpful. It's helpful to have a sense for the vocabulary because some of these words are big and difficult words. So it would make sense to me that you get familiar with the vocabulary. Click into some of these and just have a look. Have a look at what's there. Read through this purpose and process, because what it does is it explains how you might go about getting a bit more familiar with the vocabulary. As I mentioned in one of the early videos, we've got this whole glossary here, this for this lesson. So tons of great information here, but there are some actual activities related to vocabulary that might be helpful to you. You don't have to do them, but you are going to be expected to know some stuff. Okay, and so if you don't know the vocabulary, it's going to be difficult. Okay, so anyway, with regard to that, not necessary, but helpful. Now, the DQ notebook is in fact required in this section. And here's what the DQ notebook is. It basically asks the driving question for this unit. Why do we look at things from close up and far away? And as you can see on this worksheet, it's asking you to explore that question and write about that question during lesson 1.1, which is what this video is on. When we get to lesson 1.3, it's going to ask you to do the same. But the idea is that your thinking might have changed a little bit. You've learned some stuff between lesson 1.1 and 1.3, and so now you might think differently about it. This particular worksheet doesn't need to be filled out. What you do need to do is in your notebooks, just add DQ notebook under, lesson 1.1 somewhere, and write the driving question. Why do we look at things from far away and close up? And then put what you would put on here down handwritten in your notebook. When you get to lesson 1.3, I'll talk about it in that video as well, but you should do the same. You should put under lesson 1.3 somewhere, DQ notebook. Why do we look at things from far away and close up? And write your answer there and how your thinking has changed. So yes, that item is still necessary. Big history on a football field is not. You can skip past that. Scale of human history on a string is also not, and you can pass that. However, timelines and scale is required. And as always, read through the purpose and process, and there is a printed out worksheet for you to complete here. It's the same thing you'd get to if you clicked right there. But basically what it's asking you to do is create 2 timelines. And there are 4 different groups A through D, and you just have to pick 2. It says it on the worksheet, but your job is to pick 2 of these 4 groups. Doesn't matter to me which ones you pick. And you have to plot these 4 items. Let's just say you picked group A. You'd have to put those 4 items on the timeline somewhere. Same with any of these others. You're just putting those 4 items on the timeline. But you're also having to pay attention to scale. You want to think about how scale should be represented based on these different groups. So we got to think about that. You also have to give your timeline a title. Group A is not a title. What it wants to know is, based on these things, it's like anything, right? You write a story and then you give that story a title. Well, imagine that this is the story of the timeline. So what would we call that story? A timeline that includes these things. What would a good general title be? Same thing for this, or this, or this. So that's the idea. And then finally, you also have to put start and end dates on your timeline. In other words, your start date shouldn't be your birth year, right? That's the first thing that goes on this particular timeline. But let's think of a time range with a start date and an end date that makes sense based on what we need to include here. So you should have all the way to the left on your timeline a date, and all the way to the right a date. Those are your start and end dates. And then you should put these 4 items within that. Okay, that'll help with the scale as well. So that's what you're doing for this particular activity, and you're doing that twice. So you're creating 2 timelines for this activity. And then I think that's it. So that's it for 1.1 scale. And if we go back to this view, yeah, so that was the last item in there. And that'll get you through 1.1.